Once the camera was rolling, she cut open the box. Inside the box was a red plastic biohazard bag. And she said, "It's all babies. It's just babies." Our hearts are racing. We remove enough where there's another bag visible near the bottom. And when Lauren pulled out the bag, it was like a white plastic garbage bag, but you could kind of see through it, and you could see that there were 5 much larger containers in that bag. And one of those containers was significantly larger than the other 4. And our hearts just dropped. And we knew, it's like bigger containers means bigger babies.
Hello and welcome to the Ann Film Scoop.
I'm Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phil McLear from a very wet and windy Los Angeles.
Not so windy, but very, very, very wet and torrential rain, which we've had. Apparently there's an awful drought here. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when they said not that long ago that we'd never see rain again in California.
We've actually been in LA long enough to live through two record droughts, 2 droughts where there would never be rain again.
We're not here that long.
First time it was 5 years, there wasn't much rain, and then it rained for a year, and then it rained for a bit of the next year, and we're back to normal. And then it was a drought, and it was record low levels, and all these bodies were turning up in lakes. And now I'll tell you, you wouldn't find many bodies in the lakes now.
No, a lot of rain out there actually.
There's a lot of lakes.
The cats are they don't know whether they're coming or going.
Yes, mostly
coming. Yes, mostly coming home because they don't like it now. They don't like it wet.
Out. Yes.
So we have a very packed program today. Yes. Actually, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're
Phil?
going to talk about a country where the government is trying to destroy the political opposition, and we're not talking about Russia. We're talking about America.
Boom, boom.
And talking of sham justice, we're gonna look at Michael Mann's latest attempt to justify shutting down debate. And Michael Mann may think the science is settled, but so did California. We're going to look at 2 green initiatives in California that had basically the completely opposite result.
And then we have a really, truly shocking story out of Washington, D.C. You know how often we have said that that there's very, very likely to be another Gosnell out there, given the way things are regulated and given the popularity of abortion in so many places in America. And we are going to bring you a story very similar to the Gosnell story. We'll be talking to a pro-life activist who has uncovered an extraordinary story. It's very important, so keep listening for that.
So it's hard to know really where to start with the Trump madness. I'm sure you know Judge Arthur Engoron, crazy name for a crazy judge, has fined the former president $355 million and $100 bazillion for this and $10 million for that. For fraud, a fraud where no one lost any money. Well, actually, his argument, to be fair to the judge, let's give him his argument. His argument is that the banks could have got a better rate of interest if he's claiming Trump misled the banks about the value of the buildings. So they had this collateral here, which was a lot of collateral, when actually in reality wasn't that much. So they would look and say, "Oh, that's risky. We'll charge you a slightly higher rate of interest." So they could have made it more interest on the loans.
Except for the fact that the banks who were questioned are delighted with themselves, delighted with him, and really liked doing business with him. They called him a whale, I think he's called a whale investor. They really, really liked to deal with him. And I think what was really curious for me as well was, and I kind of surprised actually, which is, not, I don't even know why I was surprised, but Trump always paid back his loans on time and in full. Yes. Which I would imagine is not actually something that happens with a lot of business people.
I think in 1993 he got into trouble when there was the real estate downturn, but everyone got in trouble then, and I think he had to renegotiate the loans and all that. But apart from that, he always paid back, and he didn't declare bankruptcy. This is the thing. Trump was he didn't declare bankruptcy.
And interesting as well, I think it's been. I was very heartened by the fact that Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary from the Shark Tank TV program, who's a big entrepreneur, and I wouldn't think would be a friend of Trump's by any means, has basically said that this decision from this court, this weaponization of the courts, he said it's setting a chilling effect through the retail, through anybody who's involved in real estate, in the real estate world. Very chilling effect.
If you want to, actually, funny, I hadn't really thought, if you want to know how mad this is, go on Zillow now. But actually, it'd be even better, go on Zillow 2 years ago. Zillow do a Zestimate
Oh yes.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Which is for the value of your house, right? And a couple of years ago, it was absolutely mad. In fact, Zillow almost went bankrupt because Zillow said, "Why are we acting as the middleman? Why don't we buy houses and rent them out and flip them and resell them?" And they used their Zillow Zestimate, and of course, hugely overpaid for the houses and lost 600 million in the process. So Zillow, with all their algorithms and actual data, for the houses, they couldn't get it right. It's an inexact science.
But also, the idea. Many of you know this. It's just extraordinary. So Donald Trump was according to the court, has been convicted basically of overinflating the value of his properties. However, whatever value he put on the property, that then was. The banks were asked to obviously to check that out and see if they would accept those numbers. The banks accepted those numbers. The banks didn't have to accept those numbers.
No.
So the banks went, yep, that looks about right. That looks about right to me. And it's not like these are banks. These are tough environments where this is what they do every day. It's like this is what their business is deciding whether or not to take on a loan or whether or not to give somebody a loan. So this is their actual business. So they signed off on these estimates of the value of the property.
Also, the estimates are kind of like a red herring. If you're dealing with Donald Trump in a rising real estate market, you're going to get paid back, and the actual and by the way, it's not like Trump says it's 100 million and borrows 100 million. No, you only get to borrow half the value. So you put up your building with 100 million, and he borrows 50 million against it. And if he doesn't pay back the 50 million, they seize the building.
Oh yeah, nice one. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they give him whatever is left after they take their fees and that. So it's whenever you hear that someone has been charged with a rarely used law,
yes,
then it's a Democrat attempt to
so there's
criminalize their opponents.
What's like the important takeouts is there's no victims here. No one got hurt. No one's injured, except for Donald Trump, obviously. No one gets hurt. No one was injured. The banks are all delighted with him. He didn't. It's unbelievable, and it's like, but this is the weaponization of the judicial system.
So Fannie Willis, talk about.
Oh my God,
funny name for a lady, but anyway.
Well, listening to her speaking, I had to question whether or not she even has a law degree.
Yes.
I found it extraordinary the way that she spoke, and her whole demeanour in the courtroom.
But she was completely ungrammatical.
Yeah.
I have went saying things like that, and it's like, that's she seemed incapable of speaking proper English, and I'm sorry if that sounds snobby or racist or whatever label you want to put on it. But there's ways of communicating, and and I'm not. She's not recording a pop song. She's not in a movie. You use different language. Then this is a court of law, and by the way, if you get your tenses wrong in a court of law, it can be very serious consequences down the line. So people have to communicate correctly and exactly. And I know that. That people now say that's probably racist. Isn't that a whole arriving to work on time is racist? And
oh God,
getting good results is
that's
racist.
That's right. Being able to do arithmetic is racist.
I want to say one thing: she wasn't wearing the dress backwards.
Yeah, I didn't think she was wearing the dress backwards.
There was a zip at the front.
Yes, Philip. Yes, you fell into the belief that whatever people were saying on Twitter was actually correct about the dress. Anyway,
tell me what people say on Twitter is not true.
Yeah, shocking, isn't it?
Yes.
Anyway, a lot of everything happening in the courts recently is very disturbing. Including obviously, we just got back from Washington D.C. where the ridiculous decision was made in Michael Mann's favor.
Yes.
Extraordinary, given what we heard day after day. And by the way, we were the only people there. No one else covered the case day by day the way that we did. And I think there's a very good reason for that, because the Washington Post, etc., did not want to report on what was happening in the court. They didn't want to report on the extraordinary behaviour of Michael Mann, the pretend Nobel Prize winner, and just the way that he had behaved. So in all of these courts, what's going on is very worrying, because when people lose faith in the justice system, it's a really bad thing.
Yes.
And when you see the courts being used so weaponized against a political opponent in the shape of Donald Trump, it starts to look a lot like Russia, and obviously everyone's very conscious of what happened recently in Russia. And I thought, actually, Molly Hemingway did it. She put it up on Twitter, and I thought it was very good. She showed the front page of the Wall Street Journal the other day, which had, the finding against Trump, and underneath that was the death of Navalny, the murder of Navalny by Putin, where he had died in prison. And I mean, the similarity between the two stories was fairly obvious.
And can we just say that just because Russia has nice subways.
Oh my God!
And I'm not talking about restaurant shops. Tucker, darling, sweetheart.
Very embarrassing, Tucker, to watch you doing that. It's like, are you 12? Have you ever read anything? Have you ever read a book? Do you know that this is such a cliche? It's like he basically turned into Michael Moore, who went off to Cuba and said, "Oh, isn't the health system fabulous here?"
When I was at DC in that wonderful hotel, I was sitting at the bar, having something to eat or whatever, because I don't drink alcohol. And of course, not drinking alcohol is great too, because you can listen. So the waitress staff were having a conversation. I didn't tell you about this.
No.
So, and the next thing I heard was, it was wonderful. Nobody misgendered my husband once. Right? I'm going,
oh my God! Right. Somebody said that.
Yes, right. And I was okay. Well, that's wonderful. And so then, and like the people are so nice, and they were so nice, and like everybody owns everything.
Oh dear!
Right? And I'm going. And
Cuba. Oh God.
And she'd be taken and how long? And then the girl says, "How long are you there for?" 5 days.
She knew, but she had fairly well assessed the whole country. Fabulous Cuba.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's amazing people try to leave it at all. Why would anyone? You don't want to be
on tires. They
swimming with sharks. By the way, to leave it. Bizarre.
Yes,
really. Obviously, those people aren't right in the head at all.
Yes, but that's so. That I'm not saying that was kind of like Tucker. Wow, look at this, and they've got shops, and they've got shopping trolleys.
I thought when I saw first of all, we'd seen the thing with him in the subway, thinking how fabulous it was. They have chandeliers in the subway, isn't it great? Sure, don't worry about the fact that they've got a penal colony within the Arctic Circle. Forget about that. Yes. Isn't the subway just gorgeous? And then he goes on. Then the other one was, and I saw the video, and I thought someone has AI'd it. I actually thought somebody had said, because it was Tucker in a supermarket with all these groceries, and I thought. His naivety was, it's kind of, I'm very shocked by it. Yes. I would have thought he was more urbane and more travelled and more sophisticated, but he's not.
Yes.
Or I don't even know what, I think he's definitely, and in the week that Navalny was murdered, 47 years old, one of Putin's biggest enemy was murdered basically by the system, by Putin. It made Tucker, Tucker really, and I don't think, and I meant to search, I don't believe Tucker has said anything about that, except for, this awful statement he made, this extraordinary statement he said, all world leaders.
No, that's an old statement, that's been brought back, right?
Oh, really? It wasn't in relation to that? So he hasn't said anything about Navalny?
No, not really, but I want the editor to obviously bleep this out, but all countries are cheap, right? That we lived in Romania. Not Romania wasn't that bad, but it was coming out of communism,
yes.
out of 50 years of destruction and mayhem, and it was cheap.
And I think as somebody pointed out, actually, I think the average annual salary in Russia is $15,000 a year. So that's a different context for buying your groceries, yes. Right? Than
yes.
here.
And so Hemingway went to Paris after the First World War, because it was devastated, right? And because the franc was in the toilet, right? Mm-hmm. So countries are cheap. Countries tend to have really weak currency, so therefore your dollar goes a long way. As it's nice sometimes to go to these countries that are in decline or are really cheap. You can live like a king, and you can live in a nice area apartment, etc., etc. But it doesn't mean that country is an example.
Yeah, don't try and speak out against the regime. But having said that, and this is a nice segue, Phelim.
Yes.
Don't try and speak out against the regime. Because being in a country that's free is fabulous. Except for that now America doesn't seem very free at all, as we have just witnessed with Mark Steyn and Rand Simberg, who were just basically writing their opinion pieces.
And we did a podcast on that, Anne.
We did do a podcast.
Climate Change on Trial.
Climate Change on Trial.
Go there now and you'll listen to the podcast. We reenacted the courtroom drama every day. But Michael Mann has published
an essay in the New York Times.
And I won't bore you with it. It's just...
I can open let me read the first paragraph to you. The climate is warming. polar ice is melting, glaciers are receding, the chemistry of the oceans is becoming dangerously acidic, sea levels are rising. All of this and more are consequences of the greenhouse gases we continue to emit in the atmosphere, where they trap and radiate heat that would otherwise escape into space. These are facts, not conjecture. As in, don't you dare argue with me. Don't you debate it. Don't you question it.
The scientists researching the fallout from the inconvenient fact established more than 100 years ago continue to face attacks that threaten their research, reputations, and livelihoods.
Except for you didn't prove that in a month in a courtroom, by the way, Michael Mann. Nothing was, threatened their research, reputations, and livelihoods. All that happened to your reputation in all of this, Michael Mann, was that we found out exactly what an awful person you are, and how odious you are in terms of the way that you behave toward other academics. Your research, your money has increased, your prizes have increased, your speeches have increased. Every part of your life has improved since these apparently defamatory articles were published. And yet he's writing this essay, woe is me. One of us, Michael Mann, is just such a scientist. 12 years ago, he found himself accused of research fraud for his work documenting the rapid rise of Earth's temperature since the early 20th century. Obviously you guys all know this stuff, but Michael Mann's theory and his hockey stick have been lambasted from all quarters, not just people like Mark Stein and Rand Simberg, but scientists, including actual Nobel Prize-winning scientists.
Well, look, Michael Mann, funny enough, if the journalists had covered that court case, they would have had enough stories. I put out a Twitter thread.
Oh, yes.
Over the weekend on Friday evening, which apparently
the worst possible time to publish
a Twitter thread. It's now being watched by 387,000 people. That's the first, and the next Twitter in the thread has been 30,000. I think it's been watched at this stage by what they call it, watched, whatever.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
By views. I think it's been viewed by almost 500,000 people.
Right.
But we're talking about a man here, Michael Mann, who falsely told a NASA scientist and a journalist that Judith Curry, a Professor Judith Curry, who just disagreed with him, that she, the worst sexual smear you could do, that when she was a student at Penn State, she slept with a married professor, breaking up his marriage and essentially sleeping her way to a PhD. His own lawyer called it the sleeping her way to the top email. Except none of it was true. Curry was a tenured professor when she started going out and married a professor who was then on his way to divorce or divorced.
And also, what's even more odious is that Mann told a NASA scientist and a journalist this story that was completely made up, was completely untrue. So it wasn't like, as I said, often I said it, and I said it in the podcast, it wasn't like he said it to some bloke that he was hanging out in the pub with. Mm-hmm. He said this to NASA. He published this in a way to NASA, this discrediting of Judith Curry.
And then, in emails, he fantasized about destroying Mark Stein, who he described as an odious excuse for a human being. Another academic/scientist who criticized his hockey stick graph, he called him a piece of human filth.
Yeah.
This is the man we're supposed to feel sorry for. This is the man who is entitled to $1 million worth of damages. And we haven't finished. I'm going to do a Twitter thread this week on how he was not cleared by the Penn State investigation. How a corrupt president actually intervened and made sure that he was.
That the decision actually of the Penn State inquiry was overturned. Yeah,
in secret.
In secret, yeah. The inquiry team were supposed to be operating, divorced from anybody in the executive, and yet Spanier started writing emails and basically editing the conclusions of the inquiry.
Oh, we should say we're going off on the Mark Stein cruise.
Oh, we should say that we're going off on the Mark Stein cruise. I think we were meant to be saying that, and we're hoping that next week's podcast, which might be just audio only, by the way, because of the fact that we'll be on the boat, will be an interview, we're hoping, with Mark Stein, with the great Mark Stein.
Yes. So talking of green failures, not Mark Stein.
Green failures. Yeah. I like that film. Yeah. Go on.
Michael Mann. So California, you don't know this story.
I don't know the story.
Right? They banned plastic bags. In fact, I think you remember we were here when they banned plastic bags.
Can I just say something funny about the banning of plastic bags, though? Because the moment the coronavirus situation happened, the pandemic, as we remember, they suddenly said, "Oh God, whatever you do, use use one
single-use
plastic bags because in case of contamination of of spreading disease. And I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. So actually, single-use plastic is actually a really good thing from a health point of view.
Yes,
anyway, move on, Phelim.
So guess what the upshot of banning single-use plastic bags were?
An enormous number of plastic bags, probably somewhere.
No, more plastic bag pollution than ever.
And okay, explain it to the slow people at the back of the class here.
So the ones that you take every time, heavy plastic bag. There's so much plastic in that. One of them being thrown out
would be the equivalent of
10 or 20 plastic bags. And of course, nobody ever throws out their plastic bags. They keep them, they recycle them,
yes.
they use them for this and that and the other. So there's actually more plastic ending up in landfill because they banned plastic bags.
This is the unintended consequences, as they call it, Yeah, they don't think things through. These people do not think things through.
No,
Go on, Phelim. What's the second one then?
Well, electric vehicle cars in California plummeting in sales.
I'm somehow at some level I'm conscious of that. Why is that happening?
Because word is getting out, basically because of the bad weather in places like, there's been a lot of snow in California, actually.
Right.
And when there's snow, your car you can't get out to the charger.
Oh, yeah.
Your car freezes, and electric vehicles, the battery will die in cold weather. It won't, even if it's charged up, it'll die because there's so many computers in it and all that. Even it's sitting there still using things.
Right.
So if your car sits there for 4 days, it's there, and you can't go and charge it. So and then during the because of the storms, the electric lines went down, so you couldn't charge your vehicle. Plus, I think actually people didn't realize that Elon Musk was a right-wing nut job.
Oh, right.
And they're kind of boycotting Tesla as well. And the much vaunted electric charging network has not arrived.
Correct.
So electric.
And given the fact that we had that little earthquake the other day, it suddenly reminds one that you should always have a gas car and you should have it full of gas so that in the event that there's an earthquake, you can get in said car and drive a very, very long way with a full tank of petrol.
That's why I always have the car full of petrol.
Somebody in this group, not me, has a tendency to run the car until there's literally nothing in fumes. It's running on fumes, and that said person says, "I'll fill it up tomorrow." Whereas another person,
think of the amount of money I've saved, though. Not
think about another person in the group. Another person in the group, as in me, thinks that the tank should always be full. I also don't find it that offensive to go and get the car filled up with gas, but Phelim seems to have some little issue with that. I'm not sure what that's about. Moving on.
Okay,
moving on. So actually now we're going over to an interview that we did earlier.
Yes.
And we have very often said that there has to be other Gosnells operating in the United States. Because Gosnell was able to operate in Pennsylvania, which is not a backwater, which is very progressive, which has loads of laws, loads of agencies, loads of cops, loads of everything.
Close to New York.
And yet he was able to get away with this for decades in completely plain sight, by the way, with complaints going in and nothing happening. So unfortunately, there is a case going on in Washington, D.C. that has actually proved us correct.
So we're going to go over now to an interview with as we're saying, with Terrisa Bukovinac. She is a pro-life activist, a pro-life atheist activist, about what they discovered when they went protesting in DC. Our friends at the Susan B. Anthony list are producing a podcast about the case, and let's have a quick listen to the podcast.
To a little bit of that podcast.
Oh, sorry, just to a little bit of the podcast to give you a little taster, and then we'll go straight into the interview with Terrisa, and she'll give you the full background.
This week, 35 pro-life groups joined forces to write a letter to Congress addressed to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Why did they write him? Because despite 2 years of delays, the Department of Justice and DC Chief of Police have not provided information on any investigation into the DC-5. And just last week, hopes for any autopsies or investigation were dashed when reports came through that President Biden's administration instructed the D.C. medical examiner that they had no use for the bodies of the DC-5.
So we're here now with Terrisa Bukovinac. She's the founder of Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising. Terrisa has been arrested a number of times for her acts of civil disobedience and non-violent protest of abortion clinics. She's involved in things like rose rescues, where she and other activists enter abortion clinics to offer roses and resources to women in the waiting rooms. Terrisa was one of the two women who discovered the bodies that we're going to be talking about, and is going to take us through everything that happened the day she found the DC-5 and the latest developments in the story. So welcome to the show, Terrisa.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. So can you tell us how you found the bodies?
Yeah, it's quite the story. How did it start? Tell us about that day.
March 25th, 2022, Lauren Handy and she and I have been doing anti-abortion activism together since 2017. And I had recently moved to Washington, D.C. to found Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising. And she and I had been engaging in several rose rescues, like you mentioned, across the country. And on this day, we usually do sidewalk outreach at Planned Parenthood on Fridays. And that year, March 25th was on a Friday. But Planned Parenthood was closed that day for some unknown reason. And so we decided to change directions and go to the Washington Surgery Center, which is an all-term abortion center in Washington, D.C. We're familiar with this particular location because we had done a rose rescue here prior. We walked into the waiting room. We met a mom there who was pregnant, and she was behind on rent, $4,000, facing eviction. And we connected her with an organization called Let Them Live, who helped pay her back rent. And she walked out of the abortion center that day with her baby. So we thought, let's go and try to do that again. So we went to the Washington Surgery Center. We had roses in hand. But as soon as we arrived, we saw a truck parked outside labeled Curtis Bay Medical Waste Services. Now, we've been doing anti-abortion work for a long time, so we know that that probably means that they're taking out some of the dead babies. And when we walked around to the back of the truck, I mean, Lauren and I didn't even discuss it. We just knew, we gave each other eye contact. We knew it was happening. We walked around to the back of the truck, and the driver was there actually loading the boxes onto the truck. There were two sitting on a dolly on the sidewalk, and he had just loaded one onto the truck. And I just instinctively said, "Do you know what's in these boxes?" And he said, "No." And I said, "It's dead babies." Now, I'm speculating, of course. I didn't know for sure what was in the box at that time, but he looked shocked. And I said, "Would you get in trouble if we took one of these boxes?" And we confirmed that they were from the Washington Surgery Center. We looked at the labels on the box at Washington Surgery Center, and he checked the manifest, and it was, in fact, from there. And when I asked him, would you get in trouble if we took one? He said, "What would you do with it if I gave it to you?" And Lauren, my colleague who's Catholic, I'm an atheist, she said, "We'll give them a proper funeral and a burial." And so he said, "Okay." And we immediately panicked. We have not planned for this.
Yes.
And
careful what you wish for.
What's that?
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we immediately took the box back to her apartment. She had just moved in to a basement apartment on Capitol Hill. So it was totally clean. The refrigerator had never been used. We didn't know what we were about to get. We called literally everyone we could think of, anyone who had ever handled fetal remains, anyone who had any experience with handling medical waste, our attorneys, we didn't know what to do. And so we went after taking the box to her house, we went to the drugstore. We got gloves, masks, and we got containers because we didn't know. We thought, in our minds, we were just going to be pulling out, bloody gauze, and maybe we were going to see, a pulverized arm or a leg, something that just the thought of that was terrifying to us. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
To see an abortion victim up close like that, we knew it was going to have a major effect on the rest of our lives. So we were prepared in that case that it was just kind of a mess inside, and that we were going to have to pull out piece by piece what was in there. We set up a camera inside her apartment. When we got back, we had a Catholic deacon there. We had a reporter and a photographer, and Lauren, once the camera was rolling, she cut open the box. Inside the box was a red plastic biohazard bag. She cut open the bag, and inside was a mountain of these small turquoise plastic containers that Lauren immediately recognized as something she called whirl packs. And she said, "It's all babies. It's just babies." The entire box looked like it was full of these containers. And so, our hearts are racing. We're carefully trying to unpack each of these whirl packs onto the table, stacking them up. And each of the whirl packs had a date on it and initials, likely of the parent and the date of the procedure. And so as we're unpacking these, we remove enough where there's another bag visible near the bottom. And when Lauren pulled out the bag, it was like a white plastic garbage bag, but you could kind of see through it, and you could see that there were 5 much larger containers in that bag, and one of those containers was significantly larger than the other 4, and our hearts just dropped. And we knew, it's like bigger containers means bigger babies. So the first container that we attempted to open was the biggest one, and Lauren very courageously, with double gloves, double masks, and I'm filming with my iPhone while the other camera is rolling. And she puts her hands into the container and she says, "This baby is whole. This baby is whole." And she pulls out the most beautiful, whole baby boy that I've ever seen. I mean, we regularly carry around a 22-week fetal model with us when we're doing activism. This baby was like twice that size. And we knew right away what we were looking at, that we were looking at a possible victim of infanticide. And, if you watch that video, which has been shared, it's just this horrific moment. I'm just sobbing and cursing the people, cursing Santangelo, the doctor that did this to them. And our world just kind of fell apart in that moment. It was nothing like what we were expecting, and it's something that I think about every single day since then.
How old do you estimate the baby is?
The 5 babies were.
Experts have put Christopher X, who was the first baby that we unpacked, at over 30 weeks. So we're looking at a baby who certainly was old enough to survive on their own. He was completely whole and intact. And we know that Santangelo, the abortionist, doesn't use a feticidal injection before doing the procedure. He's talked about it on undercover videos before. And he's happy.
He's talked about the fact that he doesn't use it?
Yes, he's explicitly said, and in the descriptions that he gives for the method of death, it's more like, "I cut the umbilical cord," but this baby didn't have any wounds on them. And so we know, I've been very involved in fetal organ harvesting issues at the University of California, San Francisco, and I'm familiar with studies by the Society of Family Planning, a pro-choice institution, which shows that a baby, an induced abortion after 20 weeks without the use of digoxin, a feticidal injection, the chances of a born alive case are 50%. This baby we know is well past 20 weeks. And so Lauren and I immediately knew that the chances that this baby wasn't born alive and left to die are extremely low.
As Gosnell would say, introduces fetal demise by cutting the umbilical cord. Is that it?
Right. That's what he's said on camera. But I think that we know that isn't sufficient to causing fetal demise, and that someone as sloppy as Santangelo is likely not even doing that. It's much easier to just induce labor and then let the baby drown in the formaldehyde solution, which appears to be what happened to Christopher X.
You talked about formaldehyde. Where does that come from? What's that used for?
Well, I presume that it's to preserve the remains, but they were all in some kind of formaldehyde solution. Even the much smaller babies, the smell
Right.
was overwhelming, and we put like Vicks inside our masks so that we wouldn't have to smell the formaldehyde. Um, I mean, we were all sick. We were just absolutely sick when this was happening. I mean, it's very hard to like not gag or just the whole experience was just it was completely rocking our world like psychologically. And
Just to be clear then, so what's the legal time cutoff for abortion in DC?
there is no legal limit
No,
in Washington
exactly.
D.C.
Yeah.
Federal law, there is no federal limit in the United States, so in
Wow.
DC there's also no limit.
Yeah.
However, leaving a baby born alive to die is a federal crime.
Yes.
Um, and so is partial birth abortion. And the second victim um, the second bucket that we opened, contained the remains of a baby girl we named Harriet, a similar gestational age. But when we opened the bucket, she had one eye looking right at us, and it was just unbelievable. And when we pulled her out, she had this beautiful long foot that just writhing in pain, of course, but just being able to see how she would have been so tall and so beautiful, and just seeing her entire life just ripped away from her, and seeing up close just this absolute hatred for mankind from whoever did this. It was just horrible. But when we turned her over, we saw that she had an incision in the back of her neck, and her brain had been suctioned out, and her skull had been crushed. And this is the hallmark of an illegal partial birth abortion, a federal crime. So within the first two buckets that we opened, we were looking at something extremely serious, something that we really could not have anticipated. The next baby that we found was a baby we named Phoenix. Phoenix was completely encased in their amniotic sac. Again, similar gestational age, around 30 weeks, I would say, but we don't know the gender because they were completely encased in their amniotic sac. Again, like, how could this baby have been killed before the procedure? Phoenix most certainly drowned in their own amniotic fluid and died. And then the other two babies, Angel, a boy, and Holly, a girl, were severely dismembered. Holly was ripped in half, her spinal cord totally exposed. Angel, he'd been decapitated, and his head had been smashed. Limbs everywhere. It was just a literal horror show, unlike anything that I think I've certainly ever seen, and unlike anything that most Americans have ever seen in their lives.
Well, flash forward to today, if you like. I mean, clearly this was 2022, and given your description, you really uncovered what looks like a crime scene, and obviously you got the authorities involved. What happened? Because what should have happened, I think we're all clear what should have happened. There should be an investigation. They should find out if what you found was true. There should be conviction. People should be, the full force of the law should come after whoever was involved if something illegal had happened. What did happen?
So there was a lot of discussion between Lauren and I about what to do next. Lauren's Catholic, and she felt a strong desire to ensure that these babies had a proper burial very soon. There was a strong distrust from both of us of the DC police, and a lot of skepticism about whether would anyone care. And certainly we didn't think the police would care. But after many grueling nights of trying to figure out what to do, and we contacted like maybe 100 people looking for a private pathologist to come and take a look at these babies and do some examination of them while we had them in our possession. But no one had the expertise or was willing to do it. And so we knew that we had to make a decision quick. We felt like we didn't know how long the remains would be preserved in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
And we were just out of our league. We didn't know what we were doing. So At some point, we contacted some attorneys who issued a letter to the DCPD from us saying that we had 5 late-term aborted babies who appeared to be possible victims of federal crimes, asking them to come retrieve them while we allowed the other 110 to be buried by a priest in an undisclosed location. Now, we did have for those who are Catholic, we did have a funeral mass for the babies while they were in the refrigerator for unbaptized children performed by a priest. And then it was after that time that the 110 were taken for burial, and we had contacted the police. So now the police told us, okay, well, we'll just leave the door unlocked. We'll come in and get the babies tonight. And I think this was on the 30th or the 29th. We'll come in and get them and then just come back a couple hours later and lock up after us. So we left the door unlocked, but we went back to my apartment because we hadn't been staying at Lauren's apartment, obviously. And we were tired. We were exhausted. We've been going through this for days now. And so we just fell asleep. And then in the morning we woke up and we heard that some people that were involved in a rescue 2 years prior at Santangelo's clinic were being arrested by the FBI. So we hurried over to her apartment. And when we got out of the car, the FBI was already there outside of her apartment. And they said, "Lauren Handy, you're under arrest." And she was taken into custody right there on the sidewalk. I took a video. They gave me her things. And she was in police custody. They never went in her apartment. They simply arrested her there on the sidewalk. So as soon as she was in custody, I went into the apartment to make sure that the babies had been retrieved by the police, but they were still there. And so all of the timing of this is very strange, of course. And so I'm also panicking at this point. I call the lawyers, "What's going on? The babies are still here." And they said, "Oh, actually, you're going to have to give permission to the police to enter, and you need to be there." And so we arranged a time later that day. It was in the afternoon, hours after Lauren had been arrested by the FBI. I went to the apartment. I have pictures, timestamps that I took of the police entering, looking at the babies and taking them into custody. They shut down the entire block and made a huge scene of it with the homicide unit there, forensics. And when I left the apartment, there was a news reporter there with a camera literally in my face. Like, "Can you tell us about what happened here?" And I didn't know what to do yet. So I was like, "Not yet, but I will have comments soon." And then the story, of course, which you will read in many reputable publications, is that the DC police discovered these remains, which is just, it's such a, yeah, like I literally had to not just show them Lauren's ID and give them permission to enter. I had to give them permission on camera. And it was this whole thing. We basically had to beg them to come and take these babies. And the way that it's just been kind of illustrated, like either, some have reported that the feds raided Lauren's home and found the babies, and some have reported the DC police found them. But either way, we begged them to take them into custody.
Just a miracle, really.
Yes.
Just they were just walking along, and there they were.
They're just that good. The DC police.
Typical media misinformation. So let's talk about why Lauren was arrested, because that's separate
to this discovery of the bodies.
Although the timing is suspicious, but
yes, let's understand what she was arrested for.
So Lauren, along with the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising's board of directors member Herb Garrity, back in 2020, did a nonviolent direct action at Santangelo's clinic, knowing that he's doing abortions through all 9 months, that he has a reputation of being sloppy. There's reason to believe, because of undercover footage from 2012, that he does leave babies to die, or would in those cases where a baby was born alive. And so they went to the clinic and they did a direct action. And some of the members appeared to be potentially blocking some of the access points to the abortion center, which is a tactic that was used widely in the 80s and 90s, and actually quite successfully. Operation Rescue was the largest peaceful civil disobedience movement in the history of our country. And quite frankly, I don't believe that we would have a pro-life political party or a movement in this country had Operation Rescue not really put their bodies in between the oppressors and the oppressed and done the hard work of harnessing social tension to create social change, ultimately overturning Roe versus Wade. And so it's really critical. Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising has been committed to this, to direct action and revitalizing it in amongst young people. And so Lauren and Herb were doing their activist duty of defending these children from an actual killer. Now, when they did that action, they were arrested and then released. And so they didn't think that anything more than that was going to happen. It was quite a surprise when we just happened to have these children in our custody, and then the feds came after everybody under the FACE Act.
So they're now charged under a federal FACE Act, which is blocking legal commerce from happening. They have been convicted, and they've been immediately put in prison pending sentence. Is that correct?
Yes, we were not expecting them to be taken into custody immediately upon their conviction. But they were. Can I just say
that we've covered a lot of court cases and a lot of this. That's practically unheard of. Everyone gets 3 months, 6 months. Sometimes I'm shocked that they get 9 months. Elizabeth Holmes, I think, almost got a year to get her childcare sorted and her life in order before the sentencing.
Very chilling.
She was convicted in the fall. I think she was sentenced in May.
And I mean, this FACE Act, which is interfering with people, doing commerce, basically. I mean, I imagine you're probably a bit of an expert on it now. Is it used a lot in the United States for in other contexts other than this one?
So the FACE Act was actually a response to Operation Rescue. It was enacted in 1994 to stop Operation Rescue, and since then it's been used hundreds of times against pro-lifers. There is kind of it did have bipartisan support at the time because it is supposed to be designed to also protect pregnancy centers and churches from this type of activism, but it has been used and weaponized against pro-lifers literally hundreds of times, and I think it's only been utilized against pro-abortion activists twice.
And how are your colleagues coping? I mean, these are
they're looking at 11 years maximum. Now they probably won't get that, but they could get a lot of it.
How are they coping?
That's certainly what they're facing, and it's scary because we have a very pro-abortion president right now, very pro-abortion DOJ, pro-abortion judge that really want to see them pay for this, and they're of course scared, and they've been in jail since August. They've been in jail more than 6 months. I don't know how many of your listeners have done 6 months in jail, but that is a torturous amount of time.
Yes.
And to be in jail that long without even knowing how long you are going to be in jail is another level of torture. And it's just completely, it's the way that this has gone is obviously, it's the weaponization of the Department of Justice against totally peaceful, totally nonviolent activists because of the content of their speech.
I'm so glad, by the way, that we have you on today, Terrisa. And I know I wanted to have you on months ago, and I don't know what happened to us. But because I think this is an incredibly important story. And I think one of the things, one of the positives about the DC-5, I think, is highlighting what is also legal in America. Obviously, at the moment, they haven't, you haven't been able to establish because they haven't done autopsies on these children, or certainly they haven't released autopsies on these children. But even the fact that it's legal to abort at that stage, I think is a point that it's something that means a lot to me. That I really believe most Americans don't believe that's true.
Yes.
They don't know it's true. I mean, Phelan was asking you there about the DC law. I happen to know that the DC law is up to 9 months. Colorado, Arkansas, right? Kansas, weird places. California, New York, New Jersey, and those number of places that allow abortion up to 9 months is growing, not decreasing. can correct me, by the way, if I'm wrong, Terrisa.
I don't think that's correct about Arkansas, but I do agree.
Yeah, you're right.
With you
Arkansas
that,
is wrong. Okay.
Kansas,
Kansas, though, yeah.
Roe, many states obviously been passing ballot initiatives, which is expanding abortion into the third trimester for elective reasons. And people think, well, no, that's not. There's hard edges to both sides of this debate. The hard edge of our debate is, making sure that parents whose life is threatened by a complicated pregnancy and things like that are protected under these laws. That's something that we have to pay attention to, and something that is a real concern, and understandably so for the other side. But the hard edge of their position is literal infanticide and third trimester elective abortion, which they don't, like you said, they don't think that that's happening, and that's how these ballot initiatives are getting passed is by this ignorance.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to wrap it up here, I suppose. But I mean, that is if people knew what the abortion law was in America, there'd be a lot less people in favor of abortion.
Yes.
So when will your colleagues be sentenced? When will that happen?
May 17th, I believe.
How can people help?
Well, drawing attention to the DC-5 is the most important thing. It is about these victims. My friends they're making a sacrifice so that we can end abortion in this country. And we will not, this is the pathway to a national ban, at least at viability. We have to show the American people what happened to these babies in particular. And so please visit the website j45.com. It's on the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising website. Please continue to call your members of Congress, demand a hearing for these babies. We have a pro-life House of Representatives right now. There is no excuse that we can gloss over this or let these babies' stories fall through the cracks. This is our opportunity to really show people the hard edge of the pro-abortion side. And, you guys have done so much work in that respect with the Gosnell film, and we just have to continue on that path. And of course, with helping my friends, if you want to communicate with them, there's an app called Securus Mobile. You just download that app and you can message them, send them, words of encouragement. And of course, if you're able to give to Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, to put money on their commissaries, to make sure that they're taken care of, that's super helpful. But more than anything, this is about justice for the victims of abortion. And we're asking everyone to, yes, Lauren and Herb are victims of a weaponized justice system, but it's the babies who are the true victims here.
Yeah.
And just to tell people that, and we will put up the coordinates for the website actually in our show notes. But people, and I would urge people, and I think it is very important to look at the photographs. They're very, very powerful. And as you said, the little one with the eye looking out, it reminds me. We've obviously have the set of photographs we have ourselves from the Discovery from the Gosnell clinic, and one of the babies has a finger, pointing. Like in admonition, like a challenge, almost like a challenge, like, what are you, pay attention, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So I think that there's something extremely powerful in those photographs.
So give us those coordinates again.
The letter J, the word FOR, and the number 5.com.
J for 5.
J for 5. Okay, we'll do that.
Terrisa.
Thank you so much, Terrisa. We really appreciate it. And we'll get back to you as well in May about this, because we want to know what happens.
If not before.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thanks, Terrisa. Bye-bye. Well, I'm really glad we got to talk to Terrisa.
Yes.
What brave people, by the way. I mean, this is what bravery looks like, by the way. I mean, we have Navalny last week, and now we have these people who are basically locked up because they're trying to stop the horror of these abortions. So we'll keep in touch with that story, because I think it's incredibly interesting. And as I said, if you go to the show notes, you'll get the link to their website. It's tough going now to look at those photographs, but I think that a bit like I was talking to Terrisa after the interview just briefly there, and we both really love David Daleiden, and she traces her her radicalization to meeting David, by the way. And I was reminding her of a story of when I remember asking David one time, why, like, how did you manage to stand there in Houston when they were showing the bodies and breaking up the bodies of babies in front of him? And he said he wanted to be a witness. He wanted to bear witness to the children who had no one else to stand up for them. And she and I both, acknowledge that's so what David does. And that, in a way, is also maybe your duty, to turn up for those children, to look at the website, to look at those photographs, and to share those photographs with other people, because this is what is going on in America. This is what's going on in every town in the country, basically. And this is what pro-abortion activists are trying to push into every corner of the country. So it is something we need to be very involved in.
Yeah. So thanks. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for supporting us. If you want to support the making of this show and the making of Climate Change on Trial and all the projects we do, and we've got some
including a very big project that's coming up in May,
in New York,
in April actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you can make a donation to the Unreported Story Society. So that's go to unreportedstorysociety.com. Please,
we would very much appreciate
it. We did get some very good donations through the Markstein trial. Not enough, by the way, to cover our costs.
No.
Because it was a
brilliantly
expensive project. I have to say we enjoyed it, and it stands as a record, as a historical record to that, and I think it'll stand for the ages. So we're creating history here. We're telling the truth, but bearing witness. So please help us do that at unreportedstorysociety.com.
Thank you.